So imagine what happens when a civilization develops, and it develops out of an amalgam of tribal organizations. And so each of those tribes has their own god, which is their own sort of imaginative universe, and their attempt to make sense out of the moral landscape of being. And underneath all of those representations is a pattern, and the reason there's a pattern there is because all of those tribes are made up of people. And so there's going to be, it's like there's a domain within which variation is going to occur. So if we're going to set up a structure that works across time, it's going to at least be roughly predicated on the same structures that a dominance hierarchy is predicated on. It's going to be predicated on the same patterns of interactions that would characterize a chimpanzee troop. You know, there's this basic biological, what would you call it? There's a realm of biological necessity that constitutes the boundary space within which human interactions have to take place. I mean, I can't be so violent that I kill everyone in my tribe. That's not going to be very helpful because I'm a tribal creature. So without the tribe, what am I going to do? And so I have to be vaguely acceptable to other people because otherwise they'll kill me. Even if I'm really, really powerful, they'll take me down. And so because I have to deal with you and you and you and you and you, we're going to modify each other continually and within parameters. Now the parameters are wide, but they're not non-existent. And you know, you can see what those parameters are genuinely if you look at something like a wolf pack or a chimpanzee troop, because those are stable across, really, the structure itself is stable across at least hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years. And so so Franz de Waal shows, for example, that with the chimpanzee troops, if you have he studied them mostly at the Arnhem Zoo, and I would recommend his writings highly. De Waal, D-E-W-A-A-L. He's interested in prototypical moral behavior among chimpanzees. It's a very interesting study. And what he's showed, for example, is that if you have a particularly, the dominant dominance hierarchy in chimpanzees is male. There's a female dominance hierarchy too that overlaps the male, and some of the females are more dominant than many of the males. But the fundamental structure looks like it's patriarchal, roughly speaking, among chimpanzees. If you put a really rough, tough, barbaric, brutal dictator chimpanzee at the top, his reign tends to be unstable and violent because he isn't good at negotiating social support, and so he doesn't have any. And so that means two chimpanzees that are friends can take him out, and so that's what happens. And so the despot chimp is an unstable leader. And de Waal has shown that the more stable chimp leaders are more chimpanitarian, I guess would be the right word. It's not humanitarian. They have friends. And you know, friendship is predicated on reciprocity, even among chimpanzees. And so if a predicate of power is reciprocity, then that's one of the things that alleviates the dictatorial tendency. So anyways, so my point is, when a great civilization emerges, it emerges from the amalgam of tribal groups. And each of the tribal groups has their own ethic, but that ethic the ethics aren't entirely separate from one another. That's why tribes can trade, because they do trade. They interact with one another. It's kind of half, I remember, here's how heretofore separated tribes begin to trade. Because you don't know, you meet each other across the river, and it's like you got your bows and arrows, and someone makes a mistake and it's like warfare. And so, but you don't want to start the damn war because maybe you'll die. So you're sitting there with your bow and arrows watching these guys, and now you know they're there. And so then you go back to your tribe and you think, oh man, what the hell are we going to do about this? And one solution is, well, let's find out where they are, and then we'll go in there at night and we'll kill a bunch of them, or we'll wipe them out or something like that. Or another solution might be, did you see all the neat stuff they had? And so then what do is you find a border area, and you go and you put some things out there that are valuable, and you run away, and then you watch from the trees and you see what happens when these other people discover these valuable things that you left there. And if they're like a little on the psychopathic side, they pick it all up and giggle and run away, and that's the end of that. But if they have any sense, what they do is they leave some cool stuff on the ground too, and then they run off, and then you can go pick up their cool stuff and leave. And then it's like step one in the trust process. And then maybe you do that, you know, for a year, and it starts to fall into a cadence, and then maybe, you know, you get a little closer when you're watching in the bush, and then maybe one day you have enough courage to kind of you send your biggest, ugliest guy out there, and they do the same, and they look at each other, and finally they shake hands or something like that and trade, and then, well, then you've got a trading relationship established. And so you can see in that the emergence of a, what would you call it, negotiated, consensual, moral structure that allows trading to take place. And there's going to be rules emerge right away, which is, well, you better leave me something that's of approximately equal value, or I'm not going to play the game again. That's the thing that's so cool, is that if we only play a game once, I can do whatever I want. And so that's what psychopaths do. They play a game once, and then they go play with someone else. But if we're going to play the same game over and over and over, it's like the dominance hierarchy across time. There's a different rule for playing a game once than there is for playing a game 1,000 times. And if we're in a relationship, the game we want to play is one that can be duplicated 1,000 times. And there's really tight constraints on that. And so that's the origin, that you could consider that the biological, it's not even biological exactly, it's predicated in biology, but it's a consequence of continual interaction. The ethic emerges. It's like the rats that I told you about, that, the rats that play with each other. The big rat has to let the little rat win 30% of the time, or the little rat won't play anymore. And so, because the little rat, that's the biological framing. The limitation is the little rat doesn't want to lose all the time. That just produces negative emotion. It's not fun. It's not motivating. So why would the little rat go play again? So the constraints on our interactions are our biological constraints, and they manifest themselves in a patterned way across time. And there isn't any difference between you and me interacting across time than there is between you and me acting, say, in the next hour or so with everyone in this room. It's the same thing. It's just continual human interactions, and ethic emerges from that. Now, different groups are going to code that ethic differently. So they're going to come up with different imagistic representations and different stories. Now, one of the things they're trying to figure out is, well, let's do it in the tribal way. You have to do this inside a tribe too. You have 100 people, and 10 of them are leaders in one way or another. And then out of that 10, you think, well, who's the best person? So you have to have a hierarchy of value to determine what the most important aspect of the ethic is. And it's going to be something like trust, because that's the predicate for continued interaction. Trustworthiness. It's not really any different than honesty. It's not really any different from telling the truth. So there's a really powerful necessity for honesty to emerge as a canonical value. Caring might emerge. Power might emerge, right? The ability to exert physical power, especially in places where war is continually likely. And in lots of tribal landscapes, it's just non-stop tribal trade and warfare. So, but you can see how different ethics would emerge as canonical, depending to some degree on the situation. But trust is a really crucial one, because without that there's no relationships. Okay, so you've got tribe A, and it's got its tribal gods and its traditions and all of that. Its representation of being in its images and stories. And then you've got tribe B, and you've got tribe C, and you've got tribe D, and now they're all coming together. So what happens exactly? Well, the tribes can go to war, or they can talk. And we're thinking about a communication that might be extending across 1,000 years. You have your beliefs, I have my beliefs. I can overwhelm you, I can subsume you, but even then, I'm likely just to get indigestion from doing it. It's very, very difficult to wipe out a set of beliefs without wiping out all of the people, and that kind of nullifies the utility of unification. The more there are of you, the better you can defend yourself against other organizations that are trying to be larger. So there's a powerful self-preservation impetus to cooperation. And so one of the things you see happening in the development of the stories in the Old Testament, for example, we know this about Genesis in particular, that there were at least, this is relatively recently, so say for 3,000 years ago, not 50,000 years ago, there were two different stories. There's two different stories in the Genesis account told by two different storytellers. And people who are very good at textual analysis have been able to separate them. And they were put together I don't remember when, again it's probably about something between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. They were put together by what appeared to be a single editor. And so he took these disparate accounts and tried to organize them into something that looked like a logical narrative. And that was part of the process by which different tribal representations of the world were brought into something under which the tribes as a unit could simultaneously exist. So you can think about it as a competition between imagistic representations across time, and then the emergence of some unifying narrative that captures the key elements of all of them well enough to bring them into some sort of union. And it has to be a story with motivational power, because otherwise no one will cotton on to it. And it has to be a story that keeps uncertainty at bay, because otherwise it doesn't have any utility. So it has to be a functional story.